good whenever you are, Mr. Mayor.
That's good. Are you going to start? Or do you want to start? Just showed up and then we're all there. All right, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with a roll call. McKee here, Schultz here, Varenkamp here, Nichols here, and Councilor Bottima is excused. We'll go right into the water supply planning, which is the topic of the work session.
Aaron, I'll pass it over to Kevin first.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. We have the some of the key members from the engineering design team from Stantec here to walk through water supply planning tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ash Hammerbeck.
All right, thank you. And we can pull up the PowerPoint to start. So yeah, thanks for having us. You know, this will be the first of many kind of work sessions as we kick off this project. And so I just wanted to introduce our team and thank you for having us tonight. I'm Ash Hammerbeck. I'm a water and wastewater engineer. And for this project, we'll be serving in the project management role. And then Ryan Capel, he'll be joining us shortly. He's a process engineer. He'll be leading the treatment process design. So he'll be here and he'll be involved in a lot of these work sessions. So I wanted him to be involved this evening. And then Bruce Paulson, he's our architect, and he'll be here tonight to talk about some of those architectural considerations that we shared with you in the packet. And so at Stantec, we pride ourselves in safety, and we always try to do a safety moment. I'll keep it brief because, you know, we want to be respectful of everybody's time, but one that's kind of relevant for this project and something that we'll be talking about in future work sessions is water treatment chemicals. One of the key decisions that we'll come to is whether we want to use gas chlorine or hypochlorite for disinfection. And so it's something to consider from a safety perspective. And then also too, Kevin and his team, when they start operating these systems, will have some training and some considerations about how to handle and be around those chemicals. Not only chlorine, but others as well. So it's our safety moment, and we'll click through here to the agenda. Tonight, I just want to touch briefly on kind of our overall, you know, we're kicking off this project. What is our design process? Kind of where we at in this whole, you know, we're going to be here together for a while as we go through preliminary design and final design. Just touch on schedule and then just dive right into our two main objectives, which are to talk about the water tower versus ground storage discussion, as well as the architectural considerations. So yeah, touching on our design process, like I said, we're in preliminary design. That's what we're under contract for right now. And really our objectives and our deliverables at the end of preliminary design are going to be layout drawings. This isn't, you know, it probably won't cover all disciplines in terms of electrical, INC, structural, but it'll have those layout elements that will then kind of be finalized. That's kind of our goal at the end of preliminary design, to say, this is what our building shape looks like. These are the components we're going to have. This is how you're going to access the facility. This is how, you know, some of these operations are going to go. We want to kind of lock those items in. So that kind of leads us to the key components and decisions. And then two, that'll help us outline the list of specifications that will be part of the final design package. So final design, that's where we sharpen our pencils, get all of the plans and specifications completed. We also work through the front ends and how we want to contract and bid these projects. And so there'll probably be multiple contract packages for that. And then finally, too, we have to go through a number of plan reviews with MDH and Department of Labor and Industry. So that's kind of where we're at, and we can click into the schedule. So right now we're kind of planning to have preliminary design wrapped up by the end of February. And to do that, you know, we kind of see this time, you understand the holidays is kind of always a challenge to get through, but I think between now and the end of the year, we can really knock out some of these kind of pre-design, big picture discussion items that you have an interest in. So whether that's SCADA, like I said, the hypochlorite versus chlorine discussion, those will be some topics that we'll bring up and address here in future council work sessions. And then, too, we're working and meeting with Kevin on a weekly basis to go through checklist items. For instance, we have a geotech proposal in tonight, and that's directly related to these preliminary design elements. So we're working with that, and I think there will be some decisions that are always brought to council, and maybe others that are more in the public works, court. So we'll navigate that as we go, but just want to say that we'll have frequent updates, and we're always available, and look forward to your feedback. So, any questions or comments on kind of that intro?
I'm good.
Okay. So then I guess we can jump right in. These are our 2 meeting objectives, and I want to give plenty of time to both of them. And really, I think, so our first item obviously is storage options, and that's directly referencing the memo that was included in the packet. And if we can tonight, we could make a decision and say, yes, we want to go with the tower, or no, we don't. We want to go some other direction. But if anything, by the end of tonight, we should at least identify what the main sticking points are and what questions we need to answer to kind of the next meeting or the next time we bring this up to make a hard decision. So we'll kind of keep that up here in the back of our minds, and then we want to spend some time too going through those slides. And really the purpose of including all those examples was there's a story behind all of them. And we could go deep in on why they decided to do this or why they decided to do that, but all the photos, just things that stick out to you as like, yeah, I really like that, or no, I don't. But also too, having us provide some context for some of the things that are most important in considering what approach you want to go with. And some of those main things are expandability. So the first iteration of the treatment plant is going to be this big, and then at some point you're going to add on to it. So if you go with this style, what implications does that have? As well as overall height and code considerations, and then building materials and costs and all those things kind of wrap in. So think about what you like and what you don't like, but then also to dig into the details of what that's going to mean for the various other elements and considerations. So with that, I think we can pull up the storage memo and kind of walk through that. I'm open to your questions if there are any off the top. I wasn't going to spend a ton of time walking through it, but I certainly can if that would be helpful.
Any questions?
I didn't have any questions, no.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
I'm good, so.
All right, so yeah, I think the gist of this memo, and I know we provided, back in June, some supplemental info. There was initial discussion even in the feasibility report of these considerations, and thus far, and for it being the first system for the city of Corcoran, a water tower is kind of the base assumption. It helps a lot with operability, redundancy, emergency operations, and things like that. So that's been our assumption to date, but we understand that given its location in the park, near the new development, that there might be some consideration for an alternative, which would be a ground storage tank. So, fleshing out those 2 options is kind of the goal with this memo, and to understand where your priorities are and what your concerns are with either or.
Yeah, maybe we just touch on a couple things from a really high level. If we just want to walk through, everyone understands the difference between these 2, right? So we have the tower storage, that's your tower, and if we go to the next page, it kind of shows there's 2 types that we'll just hit on. The pedestal, those are really that cylinder type that you'll see. They're really all steel, so they're metal frame. And then the composite tower, and those are really a concrete base. You'll see them very common around a concrete base, and they have that steel top that's painted. When we talk about the maintenance on these, one of the downsides is people are not downsides, but the thing to be aware of is you have that long-term painting cost, right? And so with a pedestal type tower, you might have more than a composite type. Upfront pricing, a lot of times when we bid these, we'll bid them both and just compare them at the bid time, so we know we can kind of look at one versus the other. If there's a strong preference, we don't have to, we'll just go down one linear path and say, we really don't like that style or that look, we really want to end up in this category. If we want to go there now, it just streamlines that approach.
Why would maintenance, long-term maintenance cost on composite be less than a pedestal?
You just have less of a steel, you don't have, so this core compartment that we talked about is concrete.
Oh, that's concrete all the way up, but you're still painting that, right?
You still have it, yep. You still paint, you don't have the same, it's, in my understanding, it's not as robust of a program.
You don't have to paint it either. You
Right.
can- If you look at some
Then
of
it's
the,
unpainted concrete.
as you watch this and maybe you're driving around now, you'll look at some of these things as you see communities. Little Falls has one of these and they didn't paint the base. St. Cloud has one.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say that, as you look at these towers and different types, you might notice some communities like Little Falls, St. Cloud don't have paint on that concrete portion. So then you never have to touch it up. With painting concrete, I think it is, even if you did paint it, it would be less frequent that you would have to blast and repaint it as compared to steel.
Okay. Thank you.
So those are, just raw, that's that water tower. That we had looked at the siting, we did the original feasibility study. Let's also talk about that for a second. We talked about, the original study looked at 2 locations, one being within the Bellwether Park, and that's really what we're identifying is that plan forward right now. Key thing is we have the infrastructure in place with Bellwether being there. We have the property rights with, the park being dedicated through the development process. So we have those cost-saving things, and we can make the hydraulics work. The hydraulics are very similar to another location. If the tower weren't at this location, there's still a second option that was looked at in that original feasibility study, but there'd be additional costs and things. So that's why as we look at this first approach, our recommendation would be that Bellwether site makes the most sense just because it's ready now for this first phase. But as we talked about the other options that are out there, right? So ground storage is one of the ones we want us to look at. So in this report, we talked about ground storage and what that can be. There's really 2 things that can be, really is the on grade or some sort of a below grade, whether fully or partially buried. One of the challenges with this site, if it is located within the park, is we need to identify a little better through these borings really where groundwater is. Some of the constraints, Ash reached out to MDH to talk to them, but they have some rules on where that tank can be in relation to groundwater and high water levels. So based off that, we have to collect some more data, but just be aware of it. Might not be fully in the ground, right? You might have to look at some other considerations if that's kind of the approach you wanted to go with. Some other considerations as we talk about really the difference between these 2. With the tower, you pump it once, right? So you have your treatment facility, you treat the water, and you pump it up and it sits there, and it's that safety factor. If something happens, that emergency, whatever, forever, power goes out, tornado, whatever that situation we don't want to worry about, we still have that bucket of water up there. That's our safety net of at least a day's worth of water. As we have a smaller community, it might be a couple days. Also, Public Works, if they're doing maintenance on the facilities, we have that bucket of water there that they can maintain that pressure. So you have a time frame that you can schedule these maintenance activities, work on these things. With the ground storage, the fact that we're using this constant pumping, so we're really just pumping a constant pressure out into the system, so we're relying on those pumps. We can still, a lot of times, work around those things, but you don't quite have that same safety net that you do with that elevated storage. Full transparency, we are connected to Maple Grove, and so depending on what those agreements work like, there's future discussions to have. We don't know exactly. We have maybe the ability to turn on a valve in that scenario and count on Maple Grove, but it's still, from a public works standpoint, from the cities, typically we recommend with that first step to have that elevated storage. It's always nice because it just gives you more flexibility in your system. Do you want to just keep running? One of the other, obviously, costs, right? Costs are important, and we constantly are talking about this. One of the key things is the elevated storage upfront costs are more. You're going to pay more just for the construction of that elevated water. as we kind of laid out in there, we want to look at that 30-year, really what does that payback period look like? Because the long-term operation of the ground storage, you have a second pumping facility, so you have additional O&M on these pumps. You have to go in and spend public works time going in, checking on them daily, pump replacements, your pumps are wearing out in a more routine cycle, so you have that more upfront cost. So as we looked at those, really as you look at that 30-year payback period, they're pretty similar to another. Again, these are pretty ballpark costs. But if you want to pull to, so the tower, sorry, can you go to the next page? Yes. There we go. So if you look at that 30-year O&M expense, the ground storage tank is about $1 million more, where the upfront cost of the tank is about $1 million more upfront. So over that 30-year period, you're spending about $1 million more on the O&M of the system. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't take into account the electrical, that's kind of, you'll have a higher electrical bill, the fact that you're pumping it twice, so you'll have additional electrical costs. One thing that we'll talk about as we get into the design is, do we want to put antennas? If you go to the tower store, do you want to go to the antennas? Many communities do. It's an additional source of revenue that you can rent that tower space to antennas. That's not included in these calculations. We don't know if that's something that's going to be included, but if you were to pursue that, that's another chance to recoup some additional funds.
Sorry, go ahead.
What are the costs to fit the water tower in advance, or is that just something that's all done by the provider?
Do you, Ryan, how
Is that, am I asking that right? I mean, the water tower is receptive to the antennas and stuff.
Capable of supporting an antennas.
Yeah, I think the basic tower structure is substantial enough to support most of these.
Whatever they want to put
Yeah,
up.
they'll
Okay.
put some custom apparatus to hold them, and then
Okay.
your agreements, you'll want to write agreements so that when you do have to do maintenance, that they have to dismantle all that so that it allows for the blasting and repainting, then they'll rebuild
Yeah.
it. But the infrastructure, the structural framework of the tower should be sufficient as it is.
And those would be masts on top of the tower? They're not integrated
Yeah.
in?
If you look around, I don't know if our example, I don't know if we
I
have any
have-
photos.
Yeah, I don't have any photos.
We can bring some.
I have some photos. I took some photos of the Dayton water tower, which is a composite tower that has cellular antennas, and it's right near a new development. So I was out there yesterday, we do work up there, and took some photos, so I can just walk around and show you.
Sure, that'd be great.
See what it looks like. This is from the ground, obviously.
It's kind of rabbit ears standing on top of the tower.
It's not like
Okay.
very obtrusive, it's not,
It's become so commonplace that it
Thank you.
probably appears to
Great
be
job.
part of the tower itself.
Yeah.
it's.
There are some towers out there that have
That's on
been
unpainted base.
abandoned in terms of holding water. They're just there to
Yeah, but that's
hold
on
antennas.
unpainted
Down the
base,
road
right?
in Medina, there was one. They just had antennas on.
Okay.
Freeport,
Gotcha.
Yeah,
that's a
maybe-
big story. That baby's empty, but boy, they sure do cherish that
Perfect.
water tower.
Thank you.
It's the old scaffolding style water tower.
Sure, yeah, they're landmarks, and then you end up with some revenue from the tower,
Yeah.
the rental.
So is there any security implications over a tower versus ground storage you have to consider, and as far as the footprint, and what do you chain link off, and, are we worried about vandalism or damage to the facility?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a security standpoint, I guess, given its location in a park, a ground storage tank, if it's at grade, you might, get tagging or, something like that in terms of vandalism. But, it's like, do you want it on the big side of this ground storage tank or, on the base of your water tower? But generally, like, these facilities aren't really typically fenced off, but you can do that.
Yeah, I would say fencing since Y2K, 2001 has become more commonplace. And so with the tower, with it being elevated, you really end up with sometimes a garage door in the base part. that you can lock, and then the water's up above safe. Perhaps with the ground storage reservoir, you'd have more susceptibility, but if you've got the site fenced off, there are other things that can be done with cameras and detectors now if you really wanted to get into it. But yeah, for the most part, both facilities are safe.
Yeah, the ground storage tank would have two access hatches and then like an overflow that would be at ground level. So, it was, well, consider, you know, if it was more
Right.
at grade. But yeah. Yeah, and then there would also be a booster station facility. So that would look kind of like a little pump house you
Right.
might be familiar with, and that has, you know, several pumps and a pressure tank in there. So it would be another facility to maintain and secure.
But people could walk up to either facility right off the street? I mean, there's nothing that would keep you away from either facility?
The fence is not a requirement. If you wanted to put a fence to keep people back that far, then you could, but,
Okay.
yeah, it's a decision you could make, and it's either way. When you do get into a booster station facility, if it has doors and windows, even the hatches on a ground storage tank have contacts. So if that hatch gets opened, it will send a signal.
Sure.
Let someone know, hey, something's happening here, so.
The one in Maple Grove off of Bass Lake Road and stuff is completely underground. And what's fortunate about that, I was there when it all happened, and it would just happen to be on a hill, and it saved a lot of money, so it was a really good idea. The question that I have is, how long does that steel last? I mean, is there issues related to being completely underground, those kind of things?
Yeah, so if it was a buried tank, it would be poured-in-place concrete. So you would
Okay.
anticipate that being a 50 to 100-year structure.
And then there is no, what's the word, let's just call it foot traffic above that. If it was completely buried, you still can't be
Right, yeah,
doing things on top.
correct.
Okay.
So it sounds like we have more testing to figure out if an in-ground storage is feasible, and if it is, at what height above ground level it would protrude.
Mhm. Yeah, and so in talking with MDH, they would want to see, it has to do with where the existing ground level is right now. And it's not supposed to be below existing ground level. So if there was some type of mounding or something that happened, that could impact kind of you might have some flexibility in terms of making it seem like it's fully buried, but you just kind of grade it up and it's kind of mounded, if you will.
Oh, so even if it was flat ground out there and the water table was down 50 feet, we'd still have to mound it?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I mean, given the location and kind of that wetlands area that's just adjacent on the south side, I mean, I think there's a pretty strong bet that the water table will be
Pretty
a
high.
factor
Okay.
in that. And so there would be some options for doing like a drain system with a lift station, but again, you're relying on those pumps basically pumping constantly to draw that table down, and that's just not a path you want to go down.
Right, we'd still be looking at probably putting it up higher still.
Yes, yeah. I think the likelihood that you would achieve a fully buried option is pretty low at this point. But yeah, we're going to do the borings, and we'll be able to determine more specifically where that groundwater table sits.
Mayor, just to kind of connect those 2 points, I think groundwater storage tanks, from what I've learned through this process, they're really advantageous in certain sites. When you spoke to on the side of a hill in a mature system, almost a no-brainer. Early on in Corcoran, especially from an operational standpoint, a tower has a lot of advantages that maybe don't even show up on here. And just to kind of set your mind, even if you didn't really favor the tower in this park. Option 2, from my opinion, would be looking for a tower somewhere else before we'd even go to a groundwater storage tank. So that just to tell you how much I personally feel the value is of the tower. So just as you're factoring that in your decisions, I wanted to share that as you're asking questions.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that a tower is kind of a nicer option in this place. It kind of, in a lot of communities, it sets a statement and sets your town apart, you know, as you know there's a community there. And it gives them, having it in a park too, it's kind of a landmark to say, you know.
Yeah, with the agreements and stuff that are being done, you can't shake a stick at that park being there and such. And then my biggest concern would be if we did plant a tank in the ground, you're losing that footage of activity space and stuff. So a lot of people, in my past experiences, start getting upset about the shadows and all of those things throughout the year. We've got some great graphics in our presentation, in our packet, that just shows it's not as big a deal as what people think. And I'm fortunate enough to live across from a 90-foot silo, and I love it when the sun moves north to south and everything else. All of a sudden, it's like, why is it so dark right now and it's still in the middle of the day? Well, the silo shadow is there, and it's only there for 5 or 6 days, and then it's not long. It's just it takes a lot to convince the neighbors that it's not that big an issue.
The shadow only affects you, right, when the sun is out.
Right.
So half the day it's dark out, and then how many days of the year is it cloudy? And if your neighbor had a nice big tree in their yard next to you, you'd have a shadow too.
Exactly.
And we'd want that tree there.
But it's one of those things that our neighbors and stuff are gonna complain. But, I mean, you can't have a better neighbor than just a water tower standing there. Never changes, it's always there. It's not a big deal. My biggest concern on a tower is how much are we lighting it? I mean, is that the biggest thing? And with the lighting and everything that can happen nowadays, you can condense the lighting to very specifically the tower, but is that really needed all that much? And that's all things way down the road for me, so.
Well, I think we would only have to light the tower with a light on top, wouldn't we, for airplanes?
I'll turn that over to the experts.
I'll let Bruce go with that one.
Yeah, I believe that the only light that is required is having the red flashing.
The red blinker on top,
For
yeah.
airplanes.
Right.
And you can do any kind or any amount of lighting on the water tower itself, either from the ground or actually have lights on the towers. We were just commenting, one of the water towers that from a lighting perspective, that I like the best, that I think is the coolest, is the St. Cloud water tower. It's right on 94.
Yeah, where it changes colors and everything, yeah.
You drive by that at night, they've got some really cool colors playing on the graphics that they've got on the tower that really look pretty cool.
To what expense? I mean, how much to look cool? We can do that down the road, maybe.
That's right.
Yeah,
And
and
the other
then the
issue-
St. Cloud one, I did a lot of work with St. Cloud, and they like to put their name in the sky.
It,
Well, and that one's got a lot more traffic.
And-
lot more
Little bit.
visibility.
Little bit.
Yeah, on
The other
highway,
issue
it's-
here would be that it's essentially right in a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
dead set in the middle,
Doesn't have to be,
potentially,
to Kevin's point.
yeah.
I mean, personally, I'll take the other side. At the Night to Unite event, I had the privilege of going to the Bellwether neighborhood, and every other person that I talked to was worried about the water tower going in. And to Dean's point, that's, natural. People move in with a certain expectation. And if this was the only thing in that area, I wouldn't be as concerned, but when you look at all the things that have happened up there, I mean, when you consider that we've, as a council, approved a truck repair facility on their border, there's additional industrial sites that will develop, there's a commercial site and general mixed-use sites adjacent as well, and then we've got a undersized park that we're going to stick either a water tower or a tank in. everything is kind of being shoehorned up into that northeastern corner. I would like to not impose a tank on them if there's another choice. So I'm fine with a tower, if it's in a different location. In this location, I would want to see a tank, personally. I also appreciated the lower expenses. You guys laid that out. I did a quick net present value, and to me, it looked like it's about $400,000 more expensive to spend the extra $1 million to build the tower to recoup the additional cash flow of the lower expenses. So longer term, I think it's better financially to do the storage. I understand, Kevin, if there's operational efficiencies, and if we can't actually count on Maple Grove as being our backup in the event we have to do maintenance, that would maybe change the calculus. Maybe then it's worth the extra $500,000 to the project. But that remains to be decided a little bit, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think I kind of agree with you about the tower. It's just that location concerns me because it's so close to both the existing Bellwether homes, I guess, to the east there, north and east, and then the new phase. I don't know if that's Amberley or Bellwether, a bit of both. Bellwether, okay. So the new homes to the west, I guess I'm a little less concerned about those because hopefully by the time they're building them, people would know if something's there or going in there. But a bit concerned about the existing homes and the impact and how close a tower would be to them there.
Is this tower potentially sitting outside the dedicated park area?
I think it would, okay.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna say, there's some figures in the shadow study figures, you can kind of see a little more, like, existing homes versus,
Yeah, but we have a park on this graph, and then we have a spot where the tower is sitting south of the park,
yeah.
right? So is the land that the tower is potentially sitting on, was that dedicated by Pulte specifically for a tower?
It's dedicated as a park with the intention of potentially putting a tower and a well in it.
So they knew that with the time they dedicated it? So I don't have a whole lot of concern about the residents in Bellwether when their developer planned for a tower long before they ever signed their name to a purchase agreement on a piece of property.
I thought
They
we
should have
dedicated that
disclosed
with Amberley and Bellwether, the new one, or was that the original?
This is currently shown in the Bellwether Amberley, so the second round, the original Bellwether didn't have a tower in it. So the park is kind of split. Half is dedicated with Bellwether 1 through 5.
Okay?
And then, or the former Schulberg property, and then this is the former Van Blaricon property, so
So it wasn't part of the original
it
dedication?
wasn't part of the original Bellwether 1 through 5.
Okay.
It was a
wasn't
park,
under
it was half of
plans.
a park that, with plans for another park next door when that property came in.
All right, got you.
With no tower identified.
All right, I stand corrected on my comment then. Thank you.
And also to point out, there's also a well area dedicated in that park. So that's what this circle is, because we weren't really speaking to that, but having that well and the tower, those are dedicated footprints, I guess, as of now, as we understand it.
So if we went with the tower in another location, we'd have to acquire land.
Yeah, so when Steve referred to it, this is a more advantageous site, particularly from a cost perspective and a timing perspective. If there's other factors in the decision-making process that, Councilmember Nichols that's up to you guys to decide. But from a cost and from a timing and cost standpoint, a tower in this park is more advantageous than looking for a park somewhere else, because you gotta run the infrastructure there, you gotta acquire the land. And again, it has to be somewhere northeast, so it might not be in the park, but it's probably somewhere near the park, more than likely, because this is more of kind of a private area, higher ground. So, it's not gonna be substantially far away, it would be further away.
But we'd have to run the infrastructure from the treatment facility in well one anyway, correct?
Yeah, it's more infrastructure, it's land acquisition. costs that make it less advantageous.
I suppose we have no idea what those costs would be.
Well, until we find a site, then we can't quantify it, but I think some of the preliminary, I don't know if you remember the numbers, I want to say
So
half.
between, when we had looked at the original feasibility study, it was about $1 million, it was $800,000 was the delta between the two locations and that infrastructure cost. Now, since that's come in, we've had Bellwether has come in, so they might have closed a portion of that gap, but I don't know the exact number, but it's, if I can just maybe give you a visual, if I can point of, here's where our treatment plant is, and that's where the park is. So we have this infrastructure in here. So as we look south, we have, that's that additional infrastructure that we're talking about. Regardless, we have to connect those to get our water through the system. So wherever down in this region that tower that goes, that's that extra infrastructure. So we've got to now acquire land to go south with some sort of infrastructure.
So we'd have to go, let's say we put a tower down on the corner of County Road 30 and
Yep.
116. So we go from well treatment facility to tower, and then we have to go back to Bellwether?
Correct. Because we got to get the water from the tower then to the people that it's serving. So-
Okay.
The difference in location is infrastructure, which is land costs and infrastructure costs.
Well, and I gotta imagine that land down there is gonna be highly valued for commercial growth.
I mean, when this one came in, it was part of the dedication, wasn't it, of the park and wetlands? So presumably if, another parcel we could be in a similar situation, couldn't we?
Yeah, with that, you're obviously waiting until that
Right,
market condition to
yep.
take place, which could
Yep.
be next month, or it could be 4 years from
Right.
now, or longer.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I think it makes sense for the speed that we'd need, I believe, to recoup the costs for this project. We'd want to go seek land and acquire it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just to remind everyone that, we're really looking at a 2 to 3 year timeline from today before it's actually operational. Timing and, winter construction on these large structures and the market volatility and supply issues. So that could vary quite a bit yet at this point. So, looking, pausing now and looking somewhere else would have an impact to the overall delivery date if that was a priority.
If we said today, we're gonna go with the tower, but it's not gonna be in that park, it's gonna be outside that park, what does that do to our moratorium on building because of the water feasibility study? Does it extend it 6 months?
No, no. I think we'd still be through June, and that the purpose of that was for updating the design standards. What would any delay would really just come to us denying applications because there's insufficient resources. So essentially, that would be our no, because everything until then would require Maple Grove approval. So unless they said yes to something, we would say no to everything that would come in until we have our own system and control our own destiny. So, now that being said, I don't know, Kevin, obviously there's a lot of work to be done discussing treatment and everything else. And if we had crystal clear direction from the council that said tower yes, here no, while we're finding other land, we still can discuss treatment, architecture, there's things that can be done. And there's really limited property owners to work with, so discussions would either happen quickly favorably or quickly negatively, and then there'd be actions related to either one of those two.
So to avoid fixating on the tower choice, I know, Kevin, you said your preference is a tower for the first one. If there are logistical issues that make it impractical to pursue that in a timely fashion, how far below option tower is option tank?
That's a great question. I would definitely recommend pursuing a tower location and spending 3 to 6 months on that before I would say the ground storage is an option. I guess maybe I would say I wouldn't give up on the tower for 6 months delay. I think it's that important.
Okay.
I don't know if the team has any other comments, but that's my gut feeling where we are today and what I've learned through this process.
Well, and if water tables come in to where a tank is sitting way above ground, I mean, you look at this Egan example, it's kind of almost like an ugly water tower. So,
I don't know if
We-
it's any more ugly than the full standard tower.
At least you can hide it with trees.
Right. But I see what you're saying.
no, I mean, yeah, but there's, you know, a lot of communities that do a lot of nice things with their water towers and stuff too. But I'm not saying we have to decorate it and put John's face on it. but- It's something to consider though, because while I would love to say, yeah, let's do in-ground storage and have it just look like grass, it may not be feasible for the site either. So,
I think that was one of our issues as far as putting up a tower or a underground tank where it is over off of 10. It was a perfect place. It was a good piece of property, and it was highly elevated. There's very little of that is above grade, but still covered with dirt. So, I mean, it was a perfect situation for that location. Out here, everything is flat. We don't have any hills to put anything in or anything out here. It's,
yeah, I mean, to me, a water tower, if you're gonna have a standing structure, it's probably the least invasive of any structure you can put out there. It's not like a windmill that's sitting there spinning around or a high voltage line that's sitting buzzing all day. You know, it's just sitting there quiet. And the red light on top, you're not even gonna see it, even if you're in the neighborhood, because it's gonna be on top where only an airplane is gonna see it flying over, or if you're looking at it from Fletcher's Hill, you know, that's the only place you're gonna see it around. So,
I think I asked this question before. The open space park to the south of the city park, that's not an option because of soil conditions and the fact that it's low-lying, or is that also a choice?
I mean, I think anything's a choice. We'd evaluate it. We'd probably have to do some tree removals and whatnot, but I mean, it's a good idea. I don't,
This is a cul-de-sac, I think, of homes
yeah.
here.
yeah.
So then there's a lot of lowland, and then there's a knob where we have trails planned in here.
Yeah.
So I think, to Kevin's point, you're probably looking at, for sure, taking out some significant trees, and that we kept it because it was a high-quality natural resource area.
Yep.
So, similar, different set of issues, but
Mhm.
I hear what you're saying. I think it probably would get too tight.
I think if you start whacking down trees, you're gonna hear more complaints from those
Yeah.
people in there than if you put a tower in their backyard.
I think you're probably looking, I don't know, to speak Kevin out of turn, but, you know, as close as we could to Bellwether, if we had to look for a different location, probably. Is that fair?
Yeah, because that would then reduce the cost. The closer we are outside of here, the less the cost. So if we have to go 3 properties from Bellwether, that's all the more infrastructure costs we have to put into it.
How about, is there any magic to this specific spot that was highlighted in the park, not in the open space park like Jeremy was talking about, but is there any other kind of layouts that were looked at? It just seems like this is dead center between the existing homes and the new homes that will be there.
So more kind of safe, as far away as you can go, such as over kind of here.
Yeah, just trying to get as far, so it's not, in people's backyards or front yards essentially, and trying to mitigate the shadow impact as well, even though I don't think that's the biggest issue of the.
What is the distance to the closest homes? I'd been trying to find that.
So, this is like a scale of reference. This is 100 feet. So,
Okay.
I mean,
About 300, 350,
Yeah.
the nearest property. You talk about the location, no,
Perfect.
it wasn't, there's not a bunch of soil borings or anything like that that says it has to be in this location. However, it's kind of pushed south, as in Minnesota, we get that southern sun, so as you're casting shadows, the further we push it north, your shadows are more affecting it. So really being that south central was the least invasive on any one singular, entity, whether it's existing Bellwether, new Bellwether, or to the north, so.
Yeah, 300 yards, or 300 feet, I'm 100 yards away from a 90-foot silo, so that,
Is that
Nothing.
cattails directly south of that, or is that woods?
That's cattails, that's actually
Cattails.
open water, I mean, it's a fairly deep
Dinner.
water wetland.
Dinner
And
wetland.
then there's woods below that?
Then woods is on the property line, where the woods start is really the property line there to the south, which is our OS&P park.
Yeah.
And then the, kind of just south of the western half of the park is actually Newman West, which was part of the original Bellwether, so that'll all be developed residential, kind of where the road connects there on the south side. I don't know, Steve, you can, if it shows up, not on those, but
If you scroll to the next sheet.
basically that red line extended down is gonna be developed as part of the original Encore Bellwether.
Which
So
one?
Down one more, down
This
here.
right here. So this is
Yeah,
all
that's
already
actually gonna be
Bellwether.
future Bellwether.
So this is all already.
Right.
Platted homes that were wrapped down around
Yeah.
here.
So Steve, point to the cattail water wetland, which is right there, and then the woods is part of our open space park.
But yeah, it's probably the most centrally located in that open area. Given there's a park on, 'cause there's parks on two sides of it, really, right? There's a open field park, looks like a playground park directly to the east.
Yeah, yeah, if you go to the east, that's kind of the half of the park that was dedicated with the original Bellwether, so that park doesn't show up their best, but yeah, that's all park too, it just doesn't have a concept plan really. We haven't got to that point, so. We haven't cited this, the geotechnical might influence where it lands. Really, our focus was trying to refine, either looking for another place, or are we comfortable with the tower and then we can refine it from there, or are we comfortable with the tower but it can't be here? That's really what we're looking for today. Or if we just don't want a tower and say, make it be a groundwater storage, we would do that. And some of that guidance helps us where we spend our energy and our resources.
Has the cul-de-sac directly to the east of that park, has that been, it's plotted, right?
It's
But
platted and the whole, I don't think anyone's living there yet, but the houses, I mean, if you drive down there, almost every house is probably getting roofed and, I mean,
Oh,
there's
so
all
there is
houses
houses
built down
going
there,
in there.
yeah.
Yep.
'cause to me, that's where the only real impact is on people from the shadow line standpoint, is that cul-de-sac.
Yeah, from the, depending on when you're looking, but yeah, that's the biggest one probably for shadows.
They're closest there, yeah. But there's
Right.
lots of homes on the other side that will be affected too.
Yeah, the January one's kind of the opposite.
Is there any height difference between a pedestal and a composite?
No, so the height is determined kind of based on your hydraulic grade line, so how much pressure you want, and then how you want it to tie with like Maple Grove. So the height is driven more by the system requirements, and it's the same for either one.
Was it 180, was what it stated in here?
Yeah.
Is that set in stone based off of, like, actually analyzing it, or is that just a placeholder? Okay.
It's what we need, and also we talk about sharing system that matches Maple Grove.
Gotcha.
System.
Gotcha.
Great for our community and helps us show water and
I'm sorry, what's the height?
180 feet.
I know we talked a
66
little
feet
bit
wide.
about sharing systems. There's kind of two parts of that. There's always, if our system completely fails, we want to make sure we're designed long-term, but then we want to balance that with kind of make sure we're locally controlling it. So I think we always want to design our system to know it can operate independently, but then also set us up for success if we have a issue and we got to get water from Maple Grove, so that's like emergency backup. And then we talked about potentially those regional systems from Mississippi River that, two predecessors from now might be connecting to. We always want to be looking at our surroundings and making sure we're being smart, but we also want to make sure we can control when we need to do something without the blessing from a neighbor either. So it's really two different design constraints that we're balancing when we look at that. So I think I've heard that just interchanged a couple times, and they're both kind of different references, so I wanted to highlight that we want to rely on them, but we don't want to rely on them at the same time.
Yeah, it's a redundancy.
If you look at the difference between a composite and a pedestal, is the diameter of the tank on top any different?
No, the bowl itself would be the same volume,
It'd be the same volume, so it'd be
Yeah.
just the pedestal width, and what's the difference between the pedestal width at its narrowest versus a composite?
Yeah, so a composite pedestal is going to be significantly wider, to the point where you can store things in there, you could drive a vehicle in there, like, it's substantial, and a pedestal doesn't have any of that opportunity to, like, so if, it's a park, you might have an opportunity to put park maintenance equipment in the base of the water tower if it's a composite.
So but are you talking like significantly narrower, or what, 8 feet wide maybe? What I'm wondering about is the shadow of the pedestal part, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. So like when I was out in Dayton yesterday, yeah, it kind of looked like a silo. Like it was like a thicker shadow for sure, but I guess it would depend too a little bit on the,
Probably twice as wide
yeah.
as the spheroid.
At the neck portion of it?
Base, yeah, the pedestal
So
part.
twice as wide here, but probably like 3 times as wide.
Yeah.
Due to the skating park.
Yeah, that's what I'm
That's
wondering
what you're
more.
asking? Okay,
Yeah, because
yeah.
I guess if I had to live next to one, a pedestal would be less intrusive in my mind than a composite.
Definitely.
But then the maintenance and the looks change rapidly on the pedestals related to mold and those kind of things. We
Yeah.
haven't figured out how to epoxy coat that thing or do anything to prevent that condensation and mold buildup.
Yeah, that's a good point. The aesthetics. So like with the bowl on the pedestal, you can get that mold underneath the bottom side because it's just, yeah, condensation.
Are they
that forms there, but
uninsulated or
there's
what?
like a drip. There's like a drip line
Yeah.
that kind of contains that on the composite.
Oh,
so
they
it's-
don't like weld a drip flange or something on there that would cause condensation to drip off the tower?
Yeah, they have not, as you said, they've not perfected this art. There's some lips and things that they try to do on the spheroid shape. They don't typically weld a lip on that. I don't know that it would succeed, and they probably have tried it, and there are different shapes out there, but yeah, it's one of those things that with that bottom part of the bowl, moisture tends to collect, and then mold mildew grows.
So are the tanks uninsulated then?
They are uninsulated, yeah, just
Oh,
welded
okay.
steel. And that's the inherent problem with it, is that steel eventually, it's depending on the coating for its life. And when the coating fails, then the steel needs to be addressed in the welds.
What are I know we're dealing with the compromise between the inherent pressure you get out of this kind of a system versus the tank and the maintenance and upkeep of all the additional pumps. Have we spent any energy looking at standpipe towers where it's kind of a hybrid, where you get, I don't know, 200,000 gallons worth of storage, and you're getting inherent pressure from the height there, but it's not the big bulb at the top? Does that deal with any of our concerns about the need for extensive, redundant pumping systems and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, so the first part of your question, it hasn't been evaluated fully, but you would lose part of your volume. The big reason is that a bowl up there is gonna get you the 750,000 gallons. With the standpipe, you just establish a smaller volume of storage. So you're starting to counter the reason for it to exist, to counter the advantage of the elevated storage. It maintains the pressure, it maintains that grid line, that hydraulic grade line, but you have less volume there. So then it starts to really detract from the pros intent of the.
Yeah, and the fire flow and the storage associated with providing fire
Right.
flow.
Okay.
Yes,
You don't save enough in the pumps to make it
Right,
worthwhile? Okay.
right.
Should we do a time check of kind of where we're at?
Sure.
I know we do want to spend some time on architecture tonight. We're done at 6:45.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I guess kind of what I'm hearing from councils, it appears we have at least maybe Councilmember Nichols and Mayor McKee pretty adamant about, we should look at another location. I'm hearing Councilmember Varenkamp being like, this actually is probably gonna be fine right here and
This
maybe.
is, in my mind, the place with the tower on. I think the collateral damage to the neighbors and those kind of things, I think we can explain it well enough, and I think reasonable people are gonna accept the decision. That's my thought.
Yeah, mine too, and it would be harder for me to explain to people why we're spending city funds to go out and buy a location when we have land given to us for this purpose.
And then the cost to run
Additional
piping and everything else, land acquisition, those kind of things. Like, a rough number, Kevin, off the top of your head? I mean, millions to
I guess
relocate?
off the top of my head, it'd be $500,000 to $750,000 based on what our preliminary numbers were. That's
Like I said, we were at 800 in the original feasibility study. It'll come down from there just because we've been able to close some of that gap, but I think your estimate's probably pretty accurate.
So.
That yo-yo is to how many properties we go, so it's
Right.
not just that, if we're one
It's
property
the
over, it's
distance.
probably less. If it's two properties over, it's,
Yep.
it keeps going up, fairly.
So,
I'll just point out a couple things. It wouldn't really be city funds, it's enterprise funds, right? So this is funded by the people using the water. It's not the general city revenue that would do this. Second thing I would point out is, if we're considering $500,000 a big deal, that is how much we are spending additionally by going to a tower versus a tank, based on the net present value. And the additional cost, we're sinking in the extra $1 million for the tower to save $60,000 a year in maintenance costs.
Well,
So-
we're not factoring in potential lease agreements for the use of the tower, top of the tower either, as you pointed out.
No, those are
And
pretty
electricity.
lucrative too.
And
There's a lot of
electricity
money
costs.
there.
So, I mean, I think your present worth analysis, when you do incorporate electricity and revenues from the antenna, the tower would be more advantageous.
Okay.
It's just so.
Maybe we could ask Maggie to spend 20 minutes and just model that quickly.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that. I think from your standpoint, to the comments you made, it's what's the story to the users of the system, because you are correct, it's the enterprise fund. So if it is, this, I get this is in your backyard, but it's, we're going to save, if we do the math, and we say we're going to save, hey, it was 60 grand a year over 20 years, and that's why we put it there. If that's the story, or if it is, you know what, your bills are $1 a month more, for your 30-year mortgage, so we could put it someplace else. Those are kind of the narratives that you're going to be, we as a city are going to be
Yeah.
looking at describing to people.
a couple other quick thoughts before, and I do want to get to the architecture stuff briefly too, but let's say if a tower were to go there, or somewhere in the park, what's our timeline for figuring out if there's any sort of flexibility in the park that could work potentially better in terms of the impact on neighbors, and what type of things are we looking at in terms of landscaping, screening, other things that would minimize that impact to the neighbors as well?
I guess it depends what we're trying to answer. I think from a staff, I guess first and foremost, maybe, I mean, from a staff standpoint, Kevin and the team here have done a ton of research, and they're pretty adamant behind the scenes saying, we got to do tower. So I guess if that's the case, if that's the assumption you're comfortable with, we're really talking about looking at those shadows and just shifting them a little bit over, to a different nook of the park, and I don't think it changes, maybe a couple of less homes that are impacted by the shadow. So if a couple less homes is acceptable, that's worth looking at, but if it's just we can't have shadows on these homes, I don't know if it's worth studying too much of moving it in the park.
Right, gotcha. I mean, I think, if we can tweak something to make it any better, that's a small tweak, I'm all for that. But I don't know that the shadow is necessarily the biggest concern I have. I think it's more so just the tower itself, especially if it's completely unscreened and just kind of out, right in someone's backyard or front yard, or for half the neighborhood, kind of right in their line of sight around their house.
How would you screen a 180-foot?
Well, yeah, you could.
Therein lies the problem.
Right, but there's some you could do along, property lines or something where at least you're.
I got a challenge for you. How about transparent towers? Just something to think about, I'm sorry.
Star
And
Wars.
And I think, you know, that some of that you can soften up the base by just doing some landscaping
Yeah.
around it, you know, some shrubs and things, so it's not, you know, 140 feet of concrete right there in your face. At least the first 4 to 6 feet has got some landscaping around it and you know,
Yeah,
make it a little more, feel a little more like it fits into the park.
Yeah. And I encourage you to, you know, drive around some water towers and see them. The Dayton one is a really good example, and, you know, I was expecting this question, and I was kind of surprised. There's kind of a horseshoe, oblong development right next door to where the tower is, and from just the second road over, given that there was some mature trees, like you couldn't see it from where the houses were. The houses that were
Gotcha.
right, you know, backed up to it, obviously it's there, but it's a pretty quiet neighbor that
Yep.
isn't gonna be throwing parties or having a dog bark or whatnot, but, you know, those are the considerations.
Yeah, that's something I would say for me, if we had to go tower and, you know, we minimize things best we can in terms of tweaking location stuff, it would be a must for me that we really hit the landscaping and any sort of that type of stuff to both minimize the impact and also just improve the general park area in any way we can, because I think kind of what Jeremy said, just the series of stuff that's gone in around this neighborhood, I just don't want to continue to squeeze them for, with more and more impacts, but anything we can do to soften that blow and improve their area over there, I think is critically important. So,
The geotechnical evaluation would help us cite that in the park. So
Okay.
if we approve that later tonight, that would
Gotcha.
answer a lot of those questions, which we would get, you know, this fourth quarter, you know,
gotcha.
fairly quickly, and we could bring something back around the end of the year on a specific siting within the park. I
Okay.
would suspect we'd have a lot more details on that.
Gotcha.
Has anyone ever sold naming rights to a water tower?
The Reese's Pieces water tower.
Target water tower?
They sell it for everything else.
I guess. You know, I know architecture we wanted to get to, but I think from a staff standpoint, I don't know if we have enough direction on what we're supposed to do as far as, are we supposed to go track down and look what it takes to purchase additional land? And as much as, again, with architecture, I could actually send a survey out and rank these in order, and I probably could get some decent feedback from the council. I think I'm really after this first discussion point that's the most important from a staff standpoint. That's,
To the timeline.
How much work would it be to get the boring information to find out about in-ground storage?
Yeah, so right now we're expecting the borings to probably be completed in November. So we would have preliminary info kind of by the end of the month.
So that, at that point, could we make a decision then about ground storage versus tower in that location?
It would
If we-
give you more information. You know, we'll pick the boring locations with where we think like the load of the tower or storage tank will be. So we'll have that site kind of nailed down within the park when we do those borings, because we don't want to have to go back and punch new holes
Right.
10 feet over or whatnot. But yeah, so we'll have some of that preliminary information.
But I mean, if we decided tonight that that's gonna be the location, no matter what, we just have to make the hard decision later if it's gonna be ground storage or a tower, is that the only information we would need at that point to make that decision?
Yeah, I think just more geotechnical would help substantiate some specific looks that where, as I understand what you're asking, I think that that's really the only component we would need.
I don't see Kevin standing on the table at the mention of storage tank. Are you mentally on the table?
It's really these projects are a challenge because operationally, which is what I'm responsible for, it's a no-brainer. I certainly respect the sensitivity that is on the table today. You know, my responsibility is to advocate for, you know, the long range, the 50 or 60 years down the line, and there's a huge advantage for being our first tower, elevated storage over ground storage as your first is a significant difference maker. I'm not against groundwater storage. You know, there's the property that we acquired in Ravinia as a future water supply that's kind of built up just off the corner, adjacent kitty corner to Wildflower Park. That might be a perfect spot for groundwater storage tank. You build it into that slope, make it look nice. It might pop out a little bit, but, you know, I'm not, certainly not against that. I think it's a key part of any system. It's really the first part of our first system in Corcoran. Operationally, it's really a no-brainer, but I do respect the sensitivity that you guys are factoring in, so.
How long would it be between, you know, this is 750,000 gallons, whichever model it's going to be, how long would it be before we would add a second storage system to that network?
I believe this is size for basically what we call the box, so everything inside 116 to 30 would be supported by it. It depends on a lot of things, but generally everything that developed inside of there, if we were to ever start coming down 116 or expanding behind the box significantly, we'd have to evaluate that.
I think that box also included area west of 116 a bit as well.
A little bit, yeah. So, I mean, it's going to last us for a while. I guess it depends, but we didn't want to undersize it either, because then we'd have to build two, and you don't want to build two of these. You know, one thing that someone might say is, yeah, let's build a smaller tower and minimize it, and then all of a sudden, 3 years later, we got to build another water storage. Well, we've lost a ton of efficiencies there and spent a lot more money. It's just not probably wise.
Yeah.
So
we're talking probably at least 10, 15 years before there'd be another one? Is that what you're thinking?
Hard to say, but I think our goal was to let Northeast build out under this storage system.
I think likely southeast would be our second water tower, probably, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it would probably, we'd have to start considering what we want to do long range. We have, you know, an agreement with Maple Grove longer, but at some point that agreement could expire. And, you know, once we solve this problem, we're going to jump to southeast and start saying, what do we want to do in southeast long range? Are we committed in Maple Grove for longer? Do we want to start negotiating that now? You know, because, you know, by then it might be a 20-year window, and 20 years really changes fast, especially what we potentially think Corcoran could do. So it doesn't ever change. We've just started this conversation. We're never going to stop talking about where's the next well. Where's the next raw water main line? It's going to be routine for us as we develop, so.
Okay.
But I don't think any other towers in Northeast for, I mean, I would say quite a while to even to build all the houses that, or whatever fills up Northeast will take a decade to 15 years. So I feel pretty comfortable that we're 15 years out on anything else in Northeast.
I'd say probably 3 more election cycles for you to be here to make that decision.
Did anyone talk to John about it?
He wants a silo.
Yeah, he's a silo guy.
That's the standpipe.
That's why I keep talking about silos, so.
No, I mean, my conversations with John, obviously the financials certainly matter to him, but I don't think he's maybe as passionate about ground storage versus tower other than his joking about a silo constantly. But.
You can always paint the pedestal look like a silo.
That was my question. So can you make a tower look like a silo?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the Twitter hashtag or whatever, water towers in Minnesota, and there's a million different things. There's a corn cob down in Rochester.
Right, the old Libby's tower, yep.
Yeah.
I was gonna add one piece. We're here and listening for the most part, and, but I'm hearing impacts and cost and functionality. One piece that would, I think, make it appropriate to gather a little more information on the geotechnical side is that may also affect the functionality of the water treatment plant, because the water plant, well, the well feeds the water plant, and the water plant has to feed the tower. Depending on where that allowable, buildable elevation is for whether it's a ground storage or whatnot, it may impact the water treatment plant. As we learn more, that elevation could impact the cost of bringing water from the tower or from the water plant to the tower or to the ground storage reservoir. So it's probably a little early to talk about cost, because there's some fundamental pieces that we still need to gather with that geotechnical before we know if there's additional cost to get from the plant to a ground storage reservoir, until we know where that elevation, that ground storage could be at. So as we gather a little more information, it might make it easier, but right now it seems like the decision at hand would be just fundamentally if you're in favor of a tower versus ground storage, not considering things like cost, because there are some factors that we still need to weigh in.
So the current location, how is that in comparison to elevation of where the water treatment facility is slated to be?
So that's part of what we're still trying to kind of piece together. I think that the survey and comparing the elevation, and if we knew where the groundwater table was at the, call it the ground storage reservoir site, the park, then we could start to answer that question.
Well, let's just say hypothetically, the water table is down 60 feet, and it's not an issue, right? The actual ground level is the treatment facility right now higher or lower than the location that we're looking for either of these options?
They're about within 10 feet, I
Okay.
think. The 10 feet lower, but
Okay.
they're very similar one another.
When you ask engineers questions like that, we want to give you an exact answer.
I think technically,
I don't know, is it not
if I had to
important?
guess, the water treatment, the north end of the water treatment site is probably a little bit lower than the tower site, the park, because the general drainage ultimately goes northwest. But depending on how you build your site and earth balance your site, that's probably to come up quite a bit, because it falls off as you go north into that wetland complex, if you're
So
visualizing it.
15 to 20 feet lower at treatment.
It's being pumped no matter what, right? It's just how much pressure you're gonna have to pump it at?
Right.
What size of the line? Or is the line size fixed?
The line would be based on the flow and the pump
Okay.
size would be based on the pressure.
What I would be concerned about is that we wouldn't have to pump it another time. If we put the water, pump it from the ground to the treatment plant, now we have treated water there. We're gonna have to pump from the treatment plant to a ground storage reservoir or to the top of a tower. If we could just keep it to 2 times pumping would be best, but depending on where that ground storage reservoir is at, we may have to pump an additional time, which now adds in more capital costs, more operational cost.
Sure.
We got 2 minutes for design.
Well, I think what I'd
Architecture.
recommend is us throwing a survey out, and maybe you could provide some feedback on somewhat, like a Likert scale maybe of don't like this,
Yeah, that'd
somewhat
be good.
like, really like this, and we could get some feedback that way. I
That'd be good.
think this is still the most important part for us to keep on track of, whether we should talk to landowners, put some more math in, those types of things.
And I'm sure we can bring Bruce back out to answer
Well,
questions.
actually, I can certainly come back to the next meeting. If we
For
want
sure.
to have a discussion about the architecture and materials on the photos that were included in the packet. I'm more than happy to do that.
Appreciate it. I mean, I don't, in terms of reaching out to other landowners and trying to get that pricing together, I don't know if we're quite there yet. I mean, I think I'm not quite in favor of the tower. I'm hoping there's ways to mitigate it if that's the direction we go. I think Jeremy is along the same lines. And I think Councilor Varenkamp and Schultz are in favor of the tower now. And it sounds like John is, if he had to guess,
I don't have
probably.
a strong
Okay.
flavor either way. I think he does like the idea of having, Corcoran
Mm-hmm.
somewhere.
But-
Well, he also said he preferred, no one knows where Corcoran is as well, so.
Yeah,
So, I don't know.
Stay under the radar.
Yeah, it depends which day we're talking, I guess.
See, I guess I'd say we can probably hold off for now on trying to put together an alternative site.
Well, what might be best-
That's likely.
Maybe best, at least at the staff level, of trying to figure out where a potential non-park location could be that would reduce the amount, the length, and number of pieces of equipment to see what we're working with.
Could it
Yeah.
go next to well 1? Is that possible?
Right next to the treatment?
I think, yeah, I mean, in general, early on, we touched on some of the other stuff, having all your systems in one site is, ideally, you'd have it a little spread out.
Ideally, we like to spread them out so we have different pressure. You don't want to pump right to it. We want to distribute that pressure. Also, as we talk about building out that, we're eating up that space, and so we're anticipating building on this water treatment plant expansion. So any space we take away for a tower might inhibit future expansion of that water treatment facility.
So yeah, maybe if you want to do some just bare bones work on potential locations without getting into all the, issues that would arise from actually moving it there and having to purchase other property, but if you want to just identify some spots, that'd be
I think
useful.
I think we'll focus on the geotechnical and try
Yeah.
to maybe bring back a conversation sooner since we didn't get the architecture. We're
Yeah.
kind of trying
Sounds
to do
good.
it maybe once every 3 months. Maybe we'll try to squeeze one in when it makes sense with everything we got going on, but we'll probably fast track another work session earlier with geotechnical, some more additional thoughts on that. And I think the geotechnical will really define the process question, which is a huge question. So I think we'll focus on that, and I appreciate your guys' feedback today, and I appreciate the team for coming out.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Brad, quick question, maybe this is in the thing you're gonna send out, but if we were to go tower, or do we have any sort of agreement on the pedestal versus the,
I do composite. That's my thoughts, is
You do
the
the
composite
composite?
side instead of the pedestal. Yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you that Public Works and Police are already fighting over the storage within the water tower.
Let's add fire department in there. Can we put some garage doors all the way around and just disperse fire from that, baby?
There's a lot of
Big
competing.
nozzle off of it.
I would probably lean the other way on that, actually, if we were doing tower, I would think the pedestal one I'd prefer, but that's just kind of my gut.
For me, it would depend where it
Preference.
is.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but really the decision is more about the elevated storage versus the look, and on the critical path.
Yeah.
We can debate those options.
Yep,
I think
yep.
It's more tower
I just
versus
wanted to
ground
throw it out
storage
there.
and location at this point.
Right, yeah.
Sounds good.
As far as buildings go, I just want something that'll look nice 50 years from now. I don't want a throwaway building.
Right.
Sure.
Well, you have to keep it painted then.
Do all brick.
Rick. That's the
The goal is
answer.
to design something that will last at least 50 years, because we know this water treatment plant is going to be here for the rest of the life of the city of Corcoran, and it's going to grow. You know, we know that there's probably going to be at least one addition done to this water treatment plant
Yeah.
before the city of Corcoran grows to the point where you need a second
Treatment.
treatment plant somewhere else in the city. So we want to design the building with materials that fit in with the neighborhood, so that this building fits into the neighborhood, whether it's a pitched roof, flat roof, but we'd be looking at good long-term materials of brick and stone and things like that for the exterior veneer on this building, so that we'll, brick and stone and, even tilt-up precast, those are 100-year materials.
Yeah, so the three things I think to think about when you're looking at those photos is, materials, talking about building height, what you feel comfortable with it being, 2 stories, or, drive up and down that road and picture what something tall or shorter looks like. Groundwater will have an impact on that. Flat roof or pitched roof, and then, expandability and how those materials will affect, that addition. Can't match brick exactly, but there'll be complementary colors, things like that, so.
Does height depend on the treatment type a lot?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
And so there, you might want to do an aeration tower, which is tall, but that can be incorporated into some sort of architectural feature. Or, the Stacy Water Treatment Plant is a good example of probably, similar is probably the closest example to what you guys will probably have, and that's about 1.5 stories.
But that's without the aeration step, so.
Right.
To the question, if you did have aeration, that would raise the roof for a portion of the building, a small portion, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the homes in Ravinia are nearing 30 feet tall as well, so that's kind of your height you're probably looking at for the neighborhood, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're limited, maximum building height.
35.
Yep.
Yeah. And
The
I
architecture matters probably more than even the.
Yeah.
And I did add a few more photos to that presentation.
I'll
I
email
sent
that out.
over.
Perfect.
Okay, so you all have some additional ones. There's
That'd be great.
one that looks like a house in Savage with a 3-car garage, which,
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. The other thing I
Put an
think
apartment above it?
you, Brad, was maybe
Mother-in-law
some
part.
sort of tweak on what Pulte was doing up there with their rec building or whatever. you
Oh,
call it,
yeah.
Their amenity building.
Yep.
So maybe something in that
Yeah.
same
Match.
type of style, something to look at. I don't know, something that blends in with that. But yeah, I think when we get to the architecture stuff, there'll be plenty to talk about, so.
Yeah, but it'll be far enough away from that residential neighborhood that you won't be able to see it, right? Because you've got all those existing homes
Think
along Hunter's
far enough.
Ridge. that
There's
have-
a pretty big wetland complex. I think some of the westerly, amberly bellwether ones in the Van Blaricom piece, they might see it. But
Gotcha.
It'll be a far off. It's not like.
it's a big
Yeah, not like right
floodplain
in
there.
area, yeah.
Gotcha.
1,000 feet plus probably.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, probably more aesthetically to 116 than anything else.
gotcha.
The existing neighbors and then what that vision for 116 would look like, and then some of the neighbor to the northwest.
Yeah.
Get the nameless streets, but Hillside and some of those are actually closer than Bellwether will be.
Gotcha.
It might be interesting to get Meredith into the architecture discussion.
Sure.
too. We're ready for that.
She's good at it. Perfect.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Very
definitely.
much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Appreciate
it.
all the choices.
Thank you.
Anything else you need from us?
Just a motion to adjourn.
And I will go ahead and make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Recording stopped.